Welcome to another episode of Anibad Truth and Liberty podcast. Today we have with us Divas Parashar. Divas, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Divas is the founder of Quintinno Labs, a startup based in Delhi and Guwahati. Quintinno Labs is associated with in the manufacturing sector, especially with manufacturing EV, electric vehicles related power bank. And we are going to talk about Divas's startup, and we are also going to talk about the electric vehicle market. But we are going to go beyond that and talk about the technologies around it, new innovations that are happening, and the possibilities in the energy sector. And we are going to talk about Assam and the possibilities at home. So Divas, let's start with your views on the EV. Why did you feel a need to begin a startup to support the charging infrastructure around the electric vehicle industry?
Hi. So first of all, thank you so much for having me here. So why did I enter the EV industry? So I think it first goes back to, like any person growing up in Assam, in close proximity to nature, to the river. I think we all have that sort of connection with nature in some sort. And I think that was very much true for me as well. Growing up, I was a lot into sustainability, climate change, and I tried to follow that passion in college as well, through physics, through geophysics, all of the research work there. And I think it became, as I progressed, through the years in college, it became quite clear to me that what motivates me is, seeing some tangible results and building something from scratch. And that's why I moved into the whole idea, the whole world of startups. Now, of course, I knew one thing for sure, that whatever I do, it will be in the field of climate change and sustainability. And staying in, graduating from Ashoka University, staying in Sonipat, or, what we call a smoggy path in that sense, all the smog out there. And, one problem statement that all of us had in our lives was, the air pollution there, right? Yeah. And if you look closer into all the different reasons behind what's happening, one is, of course, the major factor is the crop burning issue, but that is more of a policy issue than that of innovation.
Yeah.
But the second largest contributor is vehicular emissions, where, sometimes now, in fact, in the Delhi NCR region, it goes sometimes beyond 50% in terms of contribution, generally around 30%. Okay. So a good place to start for me was to try and see how can we decarbonize the vehicular emission sector. And we started doing some research on, why are people not switching to clean mobility, right? And as we went about in the market, tried to understand the state of the current EV infrastructure, we realized that there is a major bottleneck, and that being EV charging infrastructure. While, manufacturing EVs was not something that you could begin with, so we tried to go deep into that particular problem of the EV charging infrastructure. What are the bottlenecks? What exactly is it leading to? And it became adequately clear that something that was very, very important was for everyone to have a level of confidence in terms of charging, right? So we thought of equipping every vehicle with its own emergency backup power, and that's how, the whole idea of Quintinno Labs emerged. What we are trying to do now is we are trying to create, so just how you have a power bank for your mobile phone, we are trying to make power banks, but for four-wheeler electric vehicles. If we talk about the statistics, you'll realize that the specific sector that we are lacking in is four-wheelers. Two-wheelers and three-wheelers, there's still a good level of adoption. But so that's how we started with this.
Yeah. So if we start with the point about EV, right? EV as a solution to, let's say, air pollution that is happening around the world. How much, in terms of statistics, how much has EV been able to solve that problem? And if you can talk a little bit about statistics in terms of the objective of decarbonizing the atmosphere, how much has EV that has already been, sort of operational, solved that problem, and how much will it solve the problem in the future? If you can talk a little bit about that.
Right. So, if I'm right, what happens is right now in the life cycle of an ICE vehicle, by ICE, I mean an internal combustion engine, which has diesel, petrol, gasoline, CNG. So in that case, they emit about 40 tons of CO2 in its entire life cycle.
Okay.
So you multiply that by all the, a number of vehicles that we have, about 360 million registered vehicles in India. So that's the amount of carbon dioxide that we are emitting on average. Now, when it comes to electric vehicles, one question that people have is, okay, it's electric, but you're charging and then, it's again being fueled by thermal power plants.
Exactly.
But here's the catch, it's not entirely true that, okay, because you're charging from a polluting source, it's polluting as much, as using a diesel or petrol engine.
Right.
It's not true. The reason being, a thermal power plant is a lot more efficient at converting petrol, diesel, like fossil fuel into energy than a car is.
Okay.
So if you are outsourcing the conversion of energy from fossil fuel into electricity to a thermal power plant as opposed to a car, then it's a lot more efficient. So what we are doing in electric vehicles is, of course, the best case scenario is if everything is renewable. That's, there's no doubt about that. But even now, because the conversion of fossil fuel to electricity is, or, to energy, to usable energy is not happening in the car, but it's happening in a thermal power plant, which is a lot more efficient than it happening in a car. So even by using a polluting sort of source originally, is still a lot more cleaner than using ICE vehicles.
Yeah.
So yes, while going ahead, we don't expect all vehicles to convert to electric. There will be a mix always, especially now with different kinds of blending happening with petrol, diesel, and other alternate fuel cars coming about in the market. But for two-wheelers and three-wheelers, we already see a massive growth, a massive adoption. In fact, if I were to quote the Bloom primer, Bloom EV primer, which is a very legitimate source of, the current state of the industry, we see that, by 2030, they expect three-wheelers to be about 85%. So new vehicle adoption, so the number of new vehicles that are registered. So by 2030, we see three-wheelers being about 85%.
Okay.
Two-wheelers about 60%.
This is across the globe?
No, in India.
In India only, yeah.
And for four-wheelers, it's still quite low. We see that by 2030, we might have about 20% of the new vehicles being electric. So there's a bottleneck for four-wheelers, but for two-wheelers and three-wheelers, it's
quite possible.
Yeah.
This despite the government wanting to achieve 100% switch to EV by 2030, I think.
Yeah. So of course, if you look at the government numbers, those are a lot more optimistic. Yeah. But I would want to believe the Bloom Ventures report a lot more than that.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that EV vehicles are not the ultimate solution. They still pollute, but they are a better technology until we find the alternative.
The best solution, yes, definitely.
So talk about charging infrastructure, because your specific focus is to improve the charging infrastructure to provide better alternatives for charging, right? And that's the reason you're building a power bank for EV vehicles. What is the problem with charging infrastructure right now, or across the globe, number one? And number two, in India, who is providing for these charging stations in India right now? Let's say in Guwahati, where we are situated right now, we don't have a lot of EV cars, so we don't have too much of a reference point. But in the bigger cities in India, in Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, in public spaces where there are EV charging points, is the government doing it, or is it the private players, like let's say some Blue Smart, which owns a fleet of electric vehicle cars, or let's say Ola Electric, who has their own fleet? Are these private players who are offering it, or is it the government who is offering it? Can you explain what the status quo of charging infrastructure is right now? Yeah. Then we can talk about what you are doing to improve it. Yeah.
So answering that question regarding who is setting it up. Yeah. So initially, when this entire revolution started, the government did a lot. Okay. I'm talking specifically about the Delhi NCR region, which was leading this entire movement.
Yeah.
So
this is the central government.
As far as my knowledge is concerned, it's primarily the state governments doing it. So in Delhi, what was happening was that the government, in partnership with companies like EESL or Delta, they were setting up the charging stations initially. Okay. But of course, the government has limited capacity in terms of scaling.
Right.
And now what we see, the movement has been taken forward by the EV OEMs like Tata Motors, or even fleets like Blue Smart. So all the commercial fleets that are coming up, they are setting up their own charging infrastructure.
So OEM by OEM, original equipment manufacturers.
Yes, that's right. And so the charging stations today are a mix. Like the old ones are primarily by the government, or initiated by the government. But now what you see mostly is by the commercial fleets like Blue Smart, etc., or by the OEMs like Tata Motors or Mahindra. So they are setting up their own charging stations now.
Yeah.
You asked a question about the current state of the EV charging infrastructure in India. So in terms of numbers in India, I think I was writing a LinkedIn post recently, and presently you have about 11,900 or say 12,000 charging stations in public, right? And the number of EV, like in terms of the number of vehicles, you have about 35 lakh or so.
Okay.
So if you were to find a ratio, you have about one charging station for every 286 vehicles in the country. Now, in isolation, this number might look good or bad. That's a different thing.
Just a small interjection. Yeah. But charging station, do you mean like one charging point or like a charging station with multiple, or can it vary?
Yeah. So I'm not very clear about that, because the government source calls it a charging station. But when you go to a charging station, you often find 2 charging points, sometimes 1.
Okay.
But so that's a little bit of a thing that
but
we
the
have.
General statistics is 1 for 200 vehicles.
Yes, one charging station for 286 vehicles.
Yeah.
And as opposed to that, if you look at the global market, say for example in China, you presently have about one charging station for 2.5 vehicles.
Okay.
So in India it's 286, in China it's 2.5.
Yeah.
In fact, by 2030 they plan to do 1:1. Yeah. So one charging station for every vehicle that's coming out in the market. So there's a long distance that we need to cover. Yeah. Now, the reason why I'm not very concerned about, whether it's one charging point or 2 charging points is because the actual scenario is even worse than that.
Okay.
The reason being, all of the charging stations that were set up initially, or even now, so India presently doesn't have a fixed charging protocol. By that, what I mean is when you're charging a vehicle, so just how for your mobile phone you have, USB or Type-C, so there are like different charging protocols.
Yeah.
So for EVs as well, you have like CHAdeMO, you have GBT, or you have CCS2. So these are different charging standards, primarily followed in different countries like China, Japan, the European market. So the cars that were coming out in India initially were all like GBT or CHAdeMO like variants, and that's why all of the charging stations that were initially set up are still that.
All right.
But now the market has moved to the CCS2 standard, which is the European standard.
Okay.
So majority of the charging stations that you have on the road are not even useful any longer, because your car has a very different protocol than what is actually available there.
Yeah. So what do the majority of vehicles in India need? Which standard of?
So right now CCS2, which is called a combined charging system 2.
Okay.
It's
what is the standard of that quality like?
So this is a standard that is followed in Europe.
Okay.
And primarily in the European market, that is the protocol that is followed.
Okay.
And right now, so we don't have a breakdown of how many stations are what charging protocol, but the point is that the actual number is far worse than 286.
Got it, yeah.
Right? And I did a lot of market research. I went around Delhi NCR looking at the status of the charging stations. Yeah. So many of them have broken displays. Many of them are not working. Yeah. Many of them have a petrol vehicle parked where which is a parking space for charging. Or in fact, some of them even have the charging gun stolen away.
Oh.
So the problem that happens is when you look at, when you check on Google Maps, you see that, there's a charging station 1 kilometer from here. You go there and then you find out that the gun is missing. You go and to the next one, you see that the display is not working. Yeah. There's no real-time data on that either. So the actual status of the charging infrastructure is quite poor in that sense. So what is happening is, for anyone who wants to charge in public, it's a game of shooting in the dark. Right. Okay. So you go to 2-3 places and then you know that, okay, the third one is working or the fourth one is working, and by then it is a problem for you.
Right.
So the alternative, what most people are now resorting to doing, or in fact that's what, that's how the industry began with, to be honest, is they're charging at home. Right. And this is again a major problem, because if people are charging at home, what it means is, first of all, only those people are able to buy an electric vehicle who can charge at home, because you need parking space inside your house, you need enough grid infrastructure so that you can charge your vehicle.
Yeah.
And as a result, what is happening is that the public utilization rate of the public charging stations is very low. It's about 2%, 3%.
Got it.
And for it to actually make sense economically, it should be at least about 30%, so that, you make profit out of it. So so it's a typical chicken egg problem. For people to actually utilize public charging infrastructure, you need a robust charging infrastructure. Yes. But on the other hand, you can build a robust charging infrastructure if people are using it, because you need that economies of scale. Yeah. So it's a chicken egg problem which is very difficult for us to solve. And that's exactly, where we want to come in with this innovative solution, where every car has its own backup solution. Yeah. That even if you're not fully able to trust the public charging infrastructure, you still have something in your backup, so that you don't have that range anxiety, and you can still be confident about actually going out and being able to safely return home or to a nearby charging station.
Yeah. So in terms of the charging infrastructure being poor, like let's say the maintenance that is not done, like that you cited the example of the charging guns not being there like often, and you are always shooting in the dark, whether you're going to find a reliable station or not. So what is the problem like I'll come to the solution that you're offering in a bit, but like, what is the problem in maintaining? Are these companies who provide the station, or even the government, they're not being able to maintain because there is a lack of demand, because people who own EVs already have charging stations at home, they've already bought that? Or is it something else? Like, is it like there is a fundamental problem with maintenance in our country, like of technologies such as these? Where does the problem lie in maintenance of this infrastructure?
Yeah, so I think it's a mix of both. The point that you mentioned about the overall lack of maintenance of public infrastructure in the country is definitely a problem. So that is something which is always there, right? In order to maintain something like this, you actually need a person there who is operating this.
Exactly.
Now the problem here again comes in from the economical perspective, that if you have to again now bear the cost of a person who's there throughout, every day, every month, every year, that's an added cost on the person operating the charging points. Now, with a public utilization rate of 2%, 3%, you are anyway not making money. On top of that, you again paying for another person to be there. It again doesn't make sense for you.
Got it.
So it's a problem that is like it's a very multifaceted problem here, and that's exactly the reason why I'm not very optimistic about the scenario right now, unless there's some policy level change. But in general, I think lack of maintenance and the problem of actually keeping a person out there is the result.
You're not optimistic about public charging stations being a solution to the charging infrastructure problem, right? I mean, is that what you're...
Yeah, I mean, eventually it will definitely get there, but it's not in the next 1 to 3 years. We are looking at a scale of 10 years, perhaps 10 to 15 to 20 years. So that's the kind of scale that we're looking at, because the additional problem is, even if you want to have a fast charging network, you cannot with the present grid infrastructure of the country. It will not be able to handle it, right? So while you have all of these problems from the economical perspective, you have also this problem from a logistical perspective, where you don't have the infrastructure to actually scale up like that. So hence I would say, like 10 to 15 to 20 years is the time limit that we are looking at for a robust charging infrastructure, where anyone can very easily go and buy and charge your vehicle as easily as you refuel your car today with petrol or diesel.
Yeah. So now coming to your solution and your startup solution, which is that you're going to offer power banks for this purpose, because in any case, everyone in this country, almost everyone who is buying an electric vehicle is sort of buying a charging station to keep it at home. But then there is a problem of, if you're traveling long distance, you're traveling intercity or interstate, then you don't have reliable stations to charge your vehicle, right? So what you essentially require is something else, right? An alternative to that, to be able to run your car for intercity, interstate, distance. So how did you come up with this idea, and how is it going to change the charging infrastructure in the country?
Right. So again, going back to the market research, when we started talking to people about what is the exact problem, we know that charging infrastructure is a problem, but how is it manifesting in your life, right? So the first thing was range anxiety, and this is common across the private and the public sector.
What do you mean by
in the private and commercial sector? Range anxiety is the fear of running out of charge or not finding a charging station on time, right? So you're driving somewhere, you run out of charge and you have a breakdown. So this anxiety that's there, that I might not find a charging station, or my car might just break down. So that is the anxiety that I'm talking about when I say range anxiety. So this is very common across the private and the commercial sector. I mean, any person you'd ask that why are you not buying an EV, they'll tell you that, oh, hum charge kahan karenge, right? So that's a problem. And specifically right now, if you look at where the adoption has happened in the commercial sector, the cabs, or in the logistics. By logistics, what I mean is delivery, right?
And why is that?
That is because when you're buying an electric vehicle, you get maximum. So, what is the highest cost? I'll use the word TCO, which is the total cost of operation. So the TCO for a vehicle like a petrol or diesel vehicle is the fuel, right?
Yes.
For an EV, it's the car, the cost of the car, the cost that you pay upfront. So economically, it will make a lot more sense for you if you can maximize the distance that you travel. If you're traveling for very short distances, if you're not using it a lot, then because you're paying so much for the car, economically it might not make a lot of sense for you if you compare with a petrol or diesel vehicle.
Right.
But in commercial sector, they are running 250, 300 kilometers every day. So because they are running so much and the cost of actually charging, the cost of electricity is very low. So per kilometer cost would be somewhere between 1 to 2 rupees for you, as opposed to 10 to 12 rupees for a petrol or diesel vehicle. So in commercial, because they're running so much, it makes a lot of sense for them to actually transition to electric. Okay. So that's why we see a lot of the highest adoption in the commercial sector today. So range anxiety is common across both. So how is range anxiety manifesting in the commercial sector? What the drivers are doing is they're so scared that their car might run out of charge. As soon as it hits about 30%, they start going back to the charging station.
Alright.
So you could have actually used that additional range to do another trip, 2 more trips, but they're going back because they're scared that we might run out of charge. So the product that we have is a power bank which is just kept. So it's also playing on your psyche, where even if you're not using it, just the validation that, okay, I know that I have 30, 40 kilometers in my trunk will allow you to take 1-2 extra trips. And remember, 2 extra trips for a fleet size of 2.5 K or 2,500 would amount to about 78 crores annually. So that's the amount of additional money that you can make if you're making 2 extra trips per day. Right? For a fleet like Blue Smart, I'm using their statistics every time. So that's one problem, range anxiety. Secondly, what you see in the commercial sector, this is specifically for commercial, is these breakdowns actually happen. So as you fast charge your vehicle on a daily basis, what happens is if you're fast charging, your battery degrades a lot faster, right? As opposed to slow charging that you do at home. Now, because they have to fast charge every day, because they're traveling long distances, they charge once at night, slow charging, and then they do a fast charging like during the day. So when you fast charge on a daily basis, your battery tends to degrade. So a battery that would have run for say 4, 5, 6 years now runs for 2 years or 3 years. So what happens is, as the car gets older, on the dashboard it might say that, oh, you have 40 kilometers left. Okay, and you drive for 5 more kilometers. Instead of it dropping from 40 to 35, it suddenly drops to 0 or say 5, and then they're stuck. Now they don't know what to do, and this number is actually in the hundreds. I was shocked myself. I thought that it might be a rare occurrence, but it's in the hundreds for a fleet size of like a 2,000, 3,000 vehicle. The problem might get slightly less worse with time, but this is the state today. And when you have a breakdown like this, you have to call a towing truck. Towing truck comes in the traffic, it tows your car back. So there's a lot of time wastage. You lose additional trips. So that's the second problem. The third problem is again very unique. It's a peak hour problem. Where all of these cars, they start at about 7, 8 a.m. in the morning. And because they have a limited range, so by 2-ish, they are all out of charge. So they all run back to the charging station at exactly the same time. So what has been observed is all of these vehicles, all the drivers that I've spoken to, they have to wait up to 2 hours every day to even get to a charging station. And this is in the middle of the day where you could actually be running and you could be doing more trips. Right? So what happens as a result is that their second shift, which is supposed to be for another 6 hours, perhaps becomes like 3.5 to 4 hours. So they're again losing out on trips. So the number of trips are reducing. So for commercial, these two problems are very high. So now if I were to summarize, I know I spoke a lot. Range anxiety, unexpected breakdowns due to flat battery, and high waiting time. So these 3 problems are, these are the manifestations of the lack of a robust charging infrastructure in the country.
Right.
And now where do we place our product here? So like I said, if every car is able to carry its own backup charge, say for 35, 40 kilometers, you don't have range anxiety. You don't have to depend on any third party to come and rescue you in case if you're stuck. When it comes to unexpected breakdowns, you don't have to wait for a towing truck, or if you see that, oh, I have just 5 kilometers left, you top up and then you reach your charging station on time. So that additional time wastage of calling a towing truck, all the hassle of, especially if you have a customer with you, so it becomes a problem. And thirdly, with the peak hour problem, say if 50% of the vehicles have our product, so they do 1 or 2 extra trips and then they come back. So all of them are not coming back at 2. Some are coming at 2, some are coming at 3. So we are flattening the peak.
So waiting time gets reduced considerably from any of the stations.
So that is how we are trying to place our product in the commercial sector. Private, of course, like I said, range anxiety is the main issue here.
In terms of your battery, the technology that you're using, can you tell us what is the specific innovation? Like how are you sort of accumulating the technology, and what are you offering in it that is going to solve this problem, like these 3 problems that you talked about?
So if you just think about it, one question that will come to your mind first is, okay, how big is it? Right? How heavy is it? And that is, of course, the biggest technological challenge that we have. If we want to make it feasible for people, it has to be compact enough, right? So that you can carry in the trunk of your car like it's nothing. It shouldn't become an additional burden on you. To solve one problem, we can't be giving another problem. So the technology that we are working on is how can we make it more and more compact while making it compact. So it is definitely a challenge. If it's compact, you have less number of cells. And what you need to do is, and because for charging a car, you need like 3.3 kilowatt for level 1 charging, which is equivalent to running 3 BHK houses. And for level 2, you need about 7.2 kilowatt, which is equivalent to running 7 3 BHK houses. So we are trying to get 7.2 kilowatt while maintaining that level of compactness. So we are making the individual cells work a lot more, right? Because it's compact. So this is the technological challenge. If you were to ask me what is our unique selling point, it's about how can we give you a lot of power while also maintaining the compactness of the pack. So what do we have to do here? So first of all, the cell, the battery pack engineering has to be done in a way that is not heating up too much, because then it becomes less efficient. Its lifetime reduces. So we are working on that. How do you extend the life while at the same time keeping it compact and making full use of it?
So in terms of building this technology and assembling, right? What are the different sort of raw materials involved? Are there any raw materials that you're having to import, or in terms of assembling this power bank? Is there technology that you're having to bring in from abroad or other places, and just the process of assembling, if you can talk about that?
Yes. So when we talk about an energy storage system, what we are using is battery, right? So it's called a BESS, or battery energy storage system. So when it comes to lithium cells, India doesn't produce lithium cells as of now. So we have to import it from China or from Taiwan.
Is it because of a lack of lithium? Because I don't think there's a lack of lithium in India. Or is it because we don't have the infrastructure to manufacture lithium cells?
No, I think there is also lack of lithium. It's only recently that we have found some deposits, and I don't know how usable it is. So there is definitely a lack of raw materials. And I think now slowly, I think a company like Log9, for instance, is trying to build cells inside the country. So we perhaps had a lack of demand as well earlier, but now with the demand coming in, it makes sense to actually invest that much money that you require in actually building cells. So that's actually happening now. So going back to your question, the cells, you have to get it from outside as of now. So when it comes to the power electronics, so electronics is one sector where India is lacking. That's for sure. And China is doing really, really well. Any kind of electronics that you want, you go to a city like Shenzhen, and then you'll find immense amount of innovation happening there. So presently, when we built our first prototype, we were not building our own technology. So the circuits is something that we had to get from China again. So it was an assembly problem where things were coming in from China. What we are trying to do now is cells. Of course, we have to be dependent on them. But when it comes to the circuits, it's something that we are now trying to build on our own. Right? The individual components, some MOSFETs we might have to get from here and there, but the building of the circuit is something that we will be doing in-house now. See, the problems with importing is a lot, right? You have to first pay a premium on getting the thing. You have to pay import duties, which are a lot higher than just GST. You have to pay for the shipping. So the cost of the product goes up dramatically, right? So that is what we are trying to solve now. So the cells will be coming in from outside, but when it comes to the power electronics, the circuits, that is what we are developing in-house now. And that's the basic raw materials in that sense that we're using.
So as far as I know, you are building the first prototype, which you're going to sort of improve and make the power bank evolve. For the prototype, what has been the cost till now? And if you can break down the cost involved, from the imports of lithium cells and batteries to assembling. If you can break down the cost.
So what we are building right now is like a 4.5 kilowatt hour system. And right now, if you look at it, it cost me about, I'm talking specifically about the components. It's about 1.5 lakh is what I had to spend on the components. Of course, there are other costs involved with actually making it. And from this 1.5 lakh, about 45 to 50,000 has simply gone into import duties and transport charges.
Wow.
Right? So a huge part of it, like about 50K, but like 45 to 50K has actually gone into just getting it here in India.
So it's a big percentage of your total cost, I'm assuming, which you can tell us here.
Yes, that's right. So this is one. And if you're looking at it from a larger perspective, the cost of developing something hardware in India, then what are the costs involved? So one is, of course, if you're doing your own research and development, then you save on some money which you would have. In our case, part of it is happening in-house, but part of it has been outsourced to another friend of mine, based out of Jammu, Zanoon, right? So now the thing is that when you are outsourcing a part of your research and development, because initially when you start up, you can't expect to build everything from scratch at home.
And you're outsourcing this because it is more cost effective, or is there any?
It's cost effective, and also in terms of the skills and expertise. So if someone has been working on that for a long time, so this particular friend of mine, Gurashish Singh, he has been working on this for a while. Not on this specifically, but on similar technology. And when you have someone who has that expertise, and we have close collaboration, and that was one of the major reasons of outsourcing part of the technology outside.
Okay.
And that, because right now it's also an assembly problem. Right. While building the prototype, we were not working on proprietary technology. It was an assembly problem where we get things together and we put it together, and that can be outsourced, right? So it saves you costs.
Yes.
It saves you costs in the sense that if you set up things of your own, it is an initial upfront cost, setting up your own lab, setting up your own equipments, components, etc. So so one cost involved if you're building something hardware in India would be the research and development cost, because you can't expect to build everything of your own. Secondly, say right now we are building the housing of the product. That's happening in India, of course. When it comes to the housing, you have sheet metal bending, 3D printing, right? A powder coating when it comes to the painting. So these are different processes that are involved, and you have to pay different vendors for that. And when you're not building it on scale, you're building just one piece, they have to work a lot more, to be honest. So the cost of that one piece actually is much higher as compared to when you're building it on scale, right? So these are the different costs. So the vendor costs are there, the outsourced R&D cost is there, your own infrastructure, because fine, someone else is assembling it for you, but you need to have your own lab infrastructure so you can test it. You can have your own data sheet so you know how exactly it's working. Or tomorrow if something goes wrong, you need to be able to actually give that person service, right? So the lab infrastructure cost, and you alone can't be doing it. You have to keep people who have expertise in the different components, or lab technicians, people who can actually work on that product if anything goes wrong. So yes, manpower, lab infrastructure, hardware components, and yes, when you're setting up lab infrastructure, you have some very costly equipments, right? Because you can't think of it like an university lab. You have to give industrial level of perfection. So the cost involved is actually pretty high. So it is a costly affair. Starting hardware is not very, very easy because of all of these different costs involved. When it comes to software, it's a lot easier in that sense to start with. So that's it.
So what does the total cost come down to of building this prototype, which you are still developing?
So it's very difficult to actually pinpoint where exactly building of the prototype ends and where your
because you're still developing the prototype.
So when it comes to something like this, you can assume about 5 to 10 lakh rupees.
So what is your plan going ahead with this technology? Are you planning to sell it in the market at some point, or are you doing a collaboration with other, let's say, OEMs or other commercial entities to sell this?
So what we are doing right now is we have 2 important collaborations. So I'll not name the companies. I don't know if I'm allowed to.
Okay.
So
but these are
4-wheeler EV manufacturers in India, right? So right now the next step, we have a prototype in hand. Now this is just built in the lab, right? So you need to actually test it out in the market and see if it's actually able to charge a car or not. While in theory it should, but there are a variety of problems that you actually come across. So we have these collaborations for product testing now. So as soon as the prototype is now ready, we will be going to their facility in different parts of the country. We will be testing on their vehicles, right? So that will give us a good idea of the energy efficiency. Whatever claims you're making, is it actually true? And then from a cost perspective, does it make sense to actually sell it, or what can be the different innovative revenue models where it's also affordable while also I'm getting my costs here.
Yeah.
So the next step, like I said, so first is of course to do a lot of testing, develop a data sheet. We know exact specifications of the product, test it in the market.
Yeah.
And then the next step would be to conduct market pilots with these companies, the commercial EV fleets. So we have had a lot of interactions with them. We know that they're facing these problems. The next step would be to actually start market pilots with them.
Yeah.
Now, of course, the technology at this stage is far from its ideal, like from its ideal state. Now, when you do the market pilots, you will come across all the different areas in which you want to then develop. We already have identified those, but again, it should be validated from the market as well. You don't want to spend money on something and then realize that, it's not even something that people want.
Yeah.
So that is the next step.
So next thing I want to sort of understand is this is innovation that you're doing like in India, and this technology you're building in India. What has been India's problem in the past? Like you have mentioned, like how China is far ahead in terms of the technology, in terms of the charging infrastructure, and in generally in terms of the electrification, advancements that they have reached. They're far ahead of India, and a problem that India has been facing over the past decades has been that in the supply chain, India is placed at a level which doesn't contribute as much value as, let's say, the US does, where a lot of research and development happens, or in China where a lot of manufacturing happens. And India, we see that often companies utilize India's big labor force for simple assembling. So how can that change in terms of a new technology like EV, probably the most exciting technology of this decade maybe? How can we in our country sort of contribute to this, which you are doing, and what needs to be done? And maybe in terms of policy, we see a lot of government subsidies that are coming in, and it's offering a major incentive for people like you, like innovators like you and other companies to sort of get into the EV electric vehicle ecosystem. What does the government need to do, and what does commercial players need to do to contribute more value to this global supply chain of electric vehicles here?
Right. So I think it's, first of all, it's important that we talk not just from an EV perspective, because this problem is truly across sectors, right?
Yeah, 100%.
I think, this is my opinion, that any country has different stages in its growth, right? And we are still in that industrial phase, where by industrial, what I mean is we are using that cheap labor to just get things done.
Yep.
We have to now come out of it, and I think we are at the brink of it, where from that place where we were just making ends meet, we have now gone to the next stage of our life cycle, where we are now starting to innovate.
Right.
This was completely absent in the past 60-70 years.
Yeah.
And now I think we have started to come out of that stage where we were just making ends meet.
Yeah.
And this is where that part will begin. Right?
This is the phase where we were there was an absence of research and development happening, like
very true,
original innovation happening, original technology being invented in the country, right? That's what it...
Exactly. So I think this is broadly different categories that you can place any country in. You can look at which stage of their life cycle they are in, and then you can exactly figure out, okay, this is where they are in that industrial phase,
right?
This is now in their innovation phase, and then there comes the next phase, which we don't know where it leads to. So China has reached that stage. Last 20 years perhaps they have been doing only research and development. Of course, they have cheap labor as well to a large extent, and then that's happening. But at the same time, you have this alternate economy which is focused on research and development. Right now, if you go to Alibaba, right, or if you go to a city like Shenzhen, like I mentioned, you have an entire you will find everything that you want. In fact, when it comes to EV specifically, this is something that Tarun Mehta was saying, who was the founder of Ather.
Okay.
In India, if you want to build a two-wheeler like Ather or Ola, you have to build everything. It's very difficult for any other person to get in easily, because every component is built in-house. Right? In China, it's in that stage where for every component you have a number of players. So there can be a company that simply says that, okay, I want to make two-wheelers, and that company doesn't actually have to build everything from scratch. You will have a vendor for your motor, you will have a vendor for your battery pack, you will have a vendor for like your like powertrain. Everything is there. All you have to do is come up with an innovative design, the end design, and then work on the the very the marginal side of things, right? So that's possible. In India, we have not reached that stage yet.
Got it.
Like I said, we are at the brink. I think I'm very optimistic about how things are going. We have, of course, done a great job, in the digital economy and software, but when it comes to hardware, we are still,
far behind.
Yeah.
So, Divas, I know that you follow very closely events around, unidentified aerial phenomena. That is UAP. We also used to, colloquially, we have known it as UFOs. And it's a conversation that we have been having for a while. And I thought I would include that conversation in this podcast for our viewers to know a perspective, to get a perspective. And so what is happening is, from what I can recall from our previous conversations, that in the US, there has been some developments. Especially the US Congress has taken notice of certain events related to unidentified aerial phenomena or UAPs. And there are scientists, physicists, astrophysicists around the world who have taken a keen interest. And there is something unique in these events that are closely related to energy as well and the evolution of energy, which also sort of, for a broader context relates to probably can hint at what the future holds for the human civilization itself. So, can you tell us where we are in terms of UAPs that are being observed, and what is the conversation that is happening among the scientific community?
Yeah, so this is actually the juicy part, right?
Yeah.
And I would love to talk about it. There's something, so on one hand, I'm working on my startup, and
Yes.
any free time that I get, I'm on Twitter trying to understand what's happening presently, reading articles.
Yeah.
It excites and interests me on a number of different levels. First of all, of course, because of, if at all this phenomenon is true, that we actually have someone here apart from humans, someone intelligent here apart from humans, the amount of possibilities that it holds is not just a matter of, oh wow, it's breaking news, but it's also because it poses a lot of philosophical questions, poses a lot of technological questions,
Right.
and also existential questions.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what gets me very excited about it.
Yeah.
So what's presently happening? So I'll give you a brief idea about where we are right now.
Yeah.
So pre-2017, so like 2017 marks an important year for the entire UAP phenomenon.
Yeah.
Pre-2017, we had reports of a lot of things happening, a lot of unidentified flying objects, or what we call UFOs back then, flying around, and we don't know who they are, what they are.
Yeah.
And a lot of different people, especially from the army, navy, military, specifically in the US and also from across the world, it's false to say that it's only in the US, had come forward, said that there are a lot of things happening, but it had not taken a mainstream sort of view.
The mainstream view was only contained to Hollywood movies and sort of cultural fascination.
Yes.
With it, not particularly scientific research, right?
True.
Yeah.
So it gained a level of authenticity when in 2017 the Pentagon released a number of files, a number of videos actually, showing what they claim are unidentified aerial phenomena. So the terminology has changed from UFO to UAP, and that's what we'll use now.
Yeah.
And they said that, okay, we know that, what you see in the video right now is something anomalous. We don't know what it is, right? And it's coming from the Department of Defense. So we know that the US has no idea what it is, right?
Yeah.
And that was the beginning. And, things kept on happening. A number of people came in. But the shift happened when David Grush, a former Air Force officer, had worked in the intelligence community for a long time, was actually involved in directly briefing the president on a number of matters. So, in a very credible position, came forward as a whistleblower. Okay. So he was part of the UAP task force that was formed by the government to actually look into this. And then he came across a number of things that will blow away your mind, right?
Right.
And he came to News Nation, and then he gave this interview. And everything that I'm saying now was also then mentioned in the US congressional hearing under oath. Okay. And he was joined by Ryan Graves and Commander Fravor, both from the Navy, from the US Navy. Now, the importance of saying this under oath in the US Congress is that if they are lying, they can be behind bars.
Yes.
So they have taken the risk of doing that. So we can be very sure that they are not lying. They could have been lied to. That's a different thing.
Yeah.
It could be an entire psyop, a disinformation campaign. That's a possibility.
Then this conversation wouldn't make sense anymore. Yeah.
Okay. So what came forward in the US congressional hearing is that the US government has a secret program on UFO crash retrievals and reverse engineering. And the claim is that a number of UAP crafts have crash landed or landed on Earth, which have been recovered by the government, and a reverse engineering has been happening on those for a long time, right?
Wow.
And along with these crash crafts came non-human biologics as well, right? It sounds shocking and surprising, but it's said under oath in the Congress.
Yeah, you said non-human biology. You didn't say extraterrestrial, right?
Yeah, and I'll come to that. Why not? And in addition to that, what came forward, what Ryan Graves said or Commander Fravor said is, when they fly aircrafts, they have consistently. It's not a one-time event. It's something so common that in fact before flying they are given training on how to deal with such matters.
Yeah,
they have seen crafts which are very unconventional, not at all what like the human-made crafts, which have wings, it has thrusters, it has rudders. They have none of those, and they're flying without heat signatures. They're doing maneuvers which are not humanly possible, or based on technology that we presently have. Say something like it's standstill and it's suddenly accelerating to an extent where they're matching the speed of the fastest aircraft that we have almost instantly, right? Something that we don't have yet. When he was asked that, do you think that it's anywhere close to what human beings or what the US government presently has in terms of its most advanced technology, the common consensus was that it's nowhere close to that. In fact, things that David Grush have mentioned, football-sized crafts, is not even small spheres. It's football-sized crafts that have been seen, that have been witnessed, and it's a phenomenon that has been going on for a long time now. Now, you asked me that why do I use non-human intelligence and not extraterrestrials? Because there's no consensus on that yet. Whether it's coming from some other planet. The possibilities are manifold. One is, of course, that it's extraterrestrial. The other possibility is that these are interdimensional beings coming from different dimensions, or they are terrestrial beings. Some intelligent species that is coexisting with human beings on our planet in some a remote corner, perhaps underground, perhaps under the water in oceans, and we have no clue about that. So these are the three possibilities that we have. So we call it non-human intelligence. We don't yet know. But again, whenever we touch upon a topic like this, it's very important that anything that we say has some scientific basis to it. Because it's very easy to speculate and say things, but I will try and make sure that everything that I say has scientific basis or is based on credible sources.
So why is this, whatever we are observing and the interest that the scientific community across the world has sort of taken post 2017 when these whistleblowers sort of came out, and why is these observations we're making so significant for human civilization, or in terms of interactions that might be possible or maybe that's already happening, if you can tell us that.
So if I were to ask any layman, what do you think is one of the biggest bones of contentions today? It's oil, right? The entire crisis in the Middle East has to do with oil. Not just that, like our economies are based on oil, so it has very long lasting impacts. But if you were actually to understand the kind of comments that have been made by these pilots, very credible people, the kind of crafts that they talk about, they're flying with absolutely no heat signature. They are not emitting gases. They're not emitting smoke, right?
But there is some energy that they are emitting.
Of course. I mean, without energy, you can't
move.
So it seems like they have already figured out clean energy. And if what David Grush is saying is true, that we have crash retrieval programs and reverse engineering programs, things that have been happening for a long time, and if it is black technology, if we were to assume that it's just human tech, we know that they have access to clean energy in a form that can be utilized for such things. And while we already have that in one hand in some confidential files in some corner of some office, on the other hand, we are fighting over oil. Just imagine what's happening here, right? So if the reason why it's very important that we understand the truth behind this is because if it is true, then everything that we are fighting over right now is just null and void. That's the reason why it's very important. climate change becomes the second important point. If we have managed the technology, or if someone else has and we have reverse engineered it and we know how clean energy can be tapped into and we already have the technology, imagine, right?
Yeah.
And the other philosophical consequence of this is, if there are other beings more technologically advanced than us, we are not at the top of the food chain. For so long we have been under the belief that we are at the top, right? Now to assume that you are not at the top and you are at the mercy of someone else, it has a lot of philosophical and existential consequences, right? Where do we stand? There are a lot of things that you have to think about, like, someone like Luis Elizondo, who's again part of the intelligence community, who came out and talks about this, says that if people get to know the truth of it, it's a very sombering effect that will happen. So that's the reason why it's very, very important. And this also brings me to an interesting article that I was just reading by Bernardo Kastrup in the Debrief, right? And so he builds a case for why he thinks that this is not extraterrestrials, these are not interdimensional beings, but these are actually terrestrial beings that have coexisted with humans. Now this brings in another philosophical aspect of coexistence between two intelligent species in the same time space or space time, right? And when he talks about this, he also brings in he's not trying to invoke some extraordinary theory. He's using theories that we already know to be true. And I'll just briefly touch upon that. So his idea is, if these are extraterrestrial beings that are coming to Earth to actually just, monitor what humanity is doing, you wouldn't see so many of them. Right now, the number of sightings that happen is in the lakhs, right? It's actually in the lakhs. Like if you were to read all of the reports in the police stations and stuff like that, it's in the lakhs.
And this is across the world, not only in the United States.
Yes, it's across the world. It's across the world, but it's primarily around military installations and nuclear facilities. So that also shows that perhaps they have some interest in our arms, or technology that can...
Our defense infrastructure.
Our defense infrastructure is the right word, right? So that's one. Secondly, the amount of the frequency that we see in the sightings, it's highly likely that they already belong to Earth. Now, if they belong to Earth, then you might ask me the questions that, okay, who are they, or why have we not been able to find them?
Right.
So he builds a very strong case here that what if there existed an intelligent species on Earth before human beings came?
Right.
Homo sapiens, as we know it, evolved about 300,000 years back, right? And the Earth is 4.56 billion years back, is old. So that's, it's like we have existed for a blink of history. Now one might still ask that, okay, if at all someone existed prior to this, we should be able to see some of their artifacts, if they had industrial revolution, where are the heat signatures, or those geological signatures that we have.
Right.
So we know plate tectonics, right?
Yes.
So what happens is that the Earth's crust is built of plates, right? And these move at a very, very slow rate, a few centimeters every year. But assuming even a few centimeters every year, it would only take a few tens of millions of years, maybe 20-30 millions of years, for the plates to actually converge at the subduction zones, go underneath, go beneath the mantle, and then get recycled. And this is something which happens. It's not a theory. It's something that we know that happens, where the plates, they go together and they meet at the convergent plate boundaries.
Right. And
then they, there's a subduction zone. They go underneath, and then at some later time there's volcanic activity, and then that same thing comes up again in a very recycled manner.
Right.
So a few tens of millions of years is enough for everything that you see on Earth today to actually completely go out of sight, irrespective of however flourishing your city is. In a few tens of millions of years, it would be gone. Alternatively, another constraint that we have, if we were to build this theory, is if someone has reached that technological advancement where people are flying these crafts that are so advanced. To reach that stage, you will have to undergo the same sort of industrial evolution that we have had, starting from using fossil fuels, polluting energy, and then you slowly grow to that stage where this happens. So they also need access to fossil fuels, right? So now comes the question, when was the earliest that you could actually tap into the fossil fuels that you have today on Earth?
Right.
It turns out that about 350 million years back is when you could actually already have access to fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are again, based on organic matter. So it's not that it always existed on Earth.
Right.
Organic matter died, it went underneath, it got under pressure, it became coal and oil and so on. So that still leaves us a huge period, starting about 350 million years back to a few tens of million years back.
Right.
So we still have about 100, 200 million years for civilizations to actually
have existed,
evolve to that stage where they have such high technology. And imagine right now, if you talk about computers, for instance, even 100 years back, a computer was as big as a room, right? And everyone could not use it. But in just 100 years or just a few decades, we have come from that to us carrying it in our pockets, right?
Correct.
In the same way, imagine the same thing happens for energy. That's partly, so I'll talk about that later and the larger vision of Quintinno Labs here. But if you look at it, even energy in that sense, today we are dependent on a central infrastructure, the grid. Right? There are thermal power plants which are huge. There are nuclear power plants that are huge, and you are dependent on that for energy. But energy is abundant if you know how to tap into it.
Right.
Maybe in another 100 years, we will be carrying, small nuclear powered devices in our pockets where everyone has access to unlimited energy independently.
Right.
So imagine a civilization that is not dependent on any central authority or any central infrastructure. It can actually exist in pockets.
Right.
And if it did exist for, these many millions of years back, and that even 65 million years back when the dinosaurs went extinct, there was an asteroid impact.
Right.
And this is something that we keep on facing. Again, after a few million years, we will have that again. There's no way you can stop it unless, we develop the technology, which we have done partly to actually, send those asteroids away, change their trajectory. So imagine the scenario, and this is not my words, that's what he's trying to argue in that article, that a civilization like that existed, a mass catastrophic event happened, 99% of it died down, but because they have learned how to live in pockets, they have access to portable, compact energy sources. They have access to computers that are so small, they can, and so they don't actually need large cities to exist.
Right.
So some part of the civilization might have remained, and they might have gone underground because there must have been some sort of generational or some sort of generational trauma that living on the surface is not safe for us. So what they do is then they have gone underground. Now imagine if that has actually happened, and there's no way you can deny this. There's no way that I can prove it right now, but there's no way that you can deny it either. It's because we are saying this by invoking scientific theories that we presently know of.
Right.
So if such a civilization actually managed to exist, 99% might have died out, someone might have remained. It's very much true that these are terrestrial beings that remain, that evolved prior to Homo sapiens and are still here on Earth with us in some remote corner of this planet. So that is the kind of theory that he's trying to build. So that is one potential theory of, potential rational explanation of the UAP phenomenon without you having to invoke life on other planets or different dimensions existing together and so on and so forth.
To sum it up, we are talking about a civilization that predated human civilization millions of years ago, and sort of Dutch philosopher, I guess, Bernardo Kastrup is his name, I think. He had argued, and they have predated human civilization, and they sort of lived within themselves because a catastrophic event might have happened to them, but they sustain some technology probably, and we are sort of wondering if these UAPs that we're spotting, unidentified aerial phenomenons, are we're wondering if they are part of that sort of imagined civilization that may have existed, and they might have technologies that are more advanced than us. So I'm wondering what are the possibilities for technologies, right? And in terms of energy, you have already spoken about how they might have already developed superior energy. One interesting thing that you said,
just one point here, this another very interesting part about the UAP phenomenon is oftentimes they have been seen to emerge from the water. So these are trans-medium crafts in that sense. So the theory that there could be some civilization, we don't know what's underneath the oceans at all, right? We just like 70-90% of the underwater world is undiscovered or unexplored in that sense. So given that you see all of this happening, it adds to the theory, like to the possibility of this particular theory. Sorry for cutting you off there.
Yeah, and this is based on the testimonies that we have heard in the US Congress. And as much as we don't have anything to prove or substantiate this argument that this scientist has been making, that this might belong to some terrestrial beings, that are not human, which are non-human intelligence.
So just one caveat here. It's not that it's not possible to prove it.
Yeah,
it's possible to prove it. The way you would do it is assuming that what David Grush has said is true, that you have these crafts and then you have the biologics. You do a DNA analysis on the bodies. You do analysis on the material of the craft. And if they are of terrestrial origins, I think that proves the theory to a large extent, or it builds a very, very, very strong case for this theory that these are terrestrial beings, and so that's it.
Yeah, and this argument is not based on any popular, science. It's not like pop science that we are talking about. These are credible scientists who are making these arguments. But in terms of, what has been observed, which is that they often appear, number one, they emerge from water is what has been said. And they are often spotted around defense or, nuclear facilities, military facilities. And that's has made people wonder, what are they interested in? What are these phenomena interested in? Why are they so keenly, so frequently spotted around these military facilities? Is it because the infrastructure that can spot these phenomena is only available in these military facilities because there is heightened security, right? In any military facility around the world, across countries? Or is it because these phenomena are interested in human military facilities because of the some of the most advanced technology development is happening in these facilities? Yeah. Why do you think so?
So it's actually a combination of both. Firstly, many of this phenomenon is much of this phenomenon actually happens in bandwidths that are beyond the human perception, right? It's happening outside of the visible spectrum. Many times it's happening outside of the audio spectrum, that the range of frequencies that we can actually hear. But in military installations, they have all of the equipments to actually look at the infrared side of things and even the ultrasonic, hypersonic side of things. So it's quite natural that you would actually see a lot more of these in such areas. But more importantly, if you look at the different events that have occurred, it's not that they have just been spotted there. There are also records of them manipulating our infrastructure, in the sense that they have turned off nuclear facilities. That has happened. Nuclear missiles have been turned off previously.
That has happened.
And
this is from these testimonies in the US Congress, right?
So this was not part of the US Congress specifically, but this is again coming from credible people who were part of those facilities there when this happened. And anyone can do a very basic Google search and you'll actually come across these reports. So they are seen to it's very clear that they are very, very interested in our defense infrastructure.
Correct.
Now this could be for two reasons. Firstly, if you were to believe Kastrup's theory that they are actually co-inhabiting planet Earth with us. It's very true that, imagine you co-inhabiting a particular space with some other species. You would not want them to blow it up. Right? So that's the first point here. Secondly, yes, if you look at it from an extraterrestrial perspective, people who are looking at us from a perspective where they want to monitor what we are doing, it makes sense to see how much we have evolved in terms of defense, right? Because that has a lot of impact on if they were to come here, how well equipped are we to tackle their presence, or how much of a threat do we pose to them? I think in that sense, it makes a lot of sense for them to be interested in our defense infrastructure. So another interesting thing that David Grush mentions in his YouTube video with J.Z. Michaels is it's not even necessary that these people, or I'll not call them people, this non-human intelligence is millions of years or even thousands of years ahead of us. It's quite possible that they perhaps have the same level of technological advancement as us. The reason why he says that is because technological development or any invention in that sense is based on the necessities and the constraints that we have. Necessity is the mother of all invention, as they say. So imagine a civilization that was facing existential threat on their planet, right? They would have been forced to leave everything else and focus on planetary travel. So just how, at that stage where, like the world wars happened and we wanted good defense, we started working on nuclear technology. At the same time, if they would have started working on interplanetary travel or interdimensional travel, then it's possible that we are perhaps at the same level of technological advancement, but they did so well in that aspect, we did very well in the nuclear aspect.
Right.
Even then, it makes sense for them to actually use that technology that they've developed, come here and see what we have worked on. Right. So even that's quite possible. So there are a number of different theories. So one thing, if we were to conclude this entire conversation, I would say that there's no doubt about the fact that there's something going on which is not human. Right? There's no doubt about it. In fact, I have had a number of conversations, say, when I speak to someone like Tyler Cowen. He's a celebrity economist. He has his own blog called The Marginal Revolution, and a very credible person in the George Mason University, also the guy behind Emergent Ventures that supports Quintinno Labs. So he has had a number of conversations with a lot of these pilots that have seen things. So if you just do a basic Google search, you look at all the different testimonies. If you look at the official reports by the US government, it's abundantly clear that there is something going on that we have no idea what it is, and it clearly looks like it's non-human intelligence. There's no doubt about that in anyone's head who has gone into this topic in depth. Now we don't know whether it's aliens, whether it's black technology, that something that we don't that's human but we don't know yet, or something that's interdimensional, or something that's terrestrial, that preceded human beings.
One aspect about this conversation that I would like to bring forth is the technology that they might possess, right? This non-human intelligent species might possess, is that they are, like, let's assume that they existed, they predated humans, and they built technologies which are supremely advanced. But what we are also seeing from whatever we have observed is that they are able to miniaturize technology, like build it into smaller bits maybe, and build it in order to be able to preserve them throughout millions and millions of years. And one reason why we should be interested in this aspect is miniaturization of technology is not only, which is already happening, right? Our phones are a result of that. Our computers, our laptops that we're carrying, these microphones are, a product of miniaturization of technology. So it's not only making our lives more convenient and improving, evolving the way we communicate, the way we, document things, the way we're preserving information about ourselves, about our civilization. But there is also a point to be made that, let's say, a catastrophic event happens to human beings, to the human civilization. We should possess the technology through which we can preserve, we should possess the infrastructure rather, to preserve these technologies that we have. And one important aspect in order to be able to do that is to be energy independent, right? Because we'll need that energy to be able to preserve that, and we will need to be independent in being able to produce that energy to survive through catastrophic events that might hit us at any point.
Yeah, so that's absolutely true. If you look at what Elon Musk says, if humanity were to survive, we have to become an interplanetary species, right? And that's what he's trying to do, take us to Mars, right? Or maybe beyond Mars at some point. Another important part of it is, while, if you look at it from a very feasibility or practicality view, not everyone will be able to, leave Earth. So while that's one aspect where we need to become an interplanetary species, that's part of the human, the human story. It's also important that we increase our chances of survival in our own planet. And the more dependent you are on external factors, the wider your net is in terms of your dependability, your chances of survival in the long run keeps on reducing. The more nodes that you can keep cutting, the more independent you become, the higher the chances of your survival. Right now, when it comes to technology, like I said, we have been able to miniaturize computers to an extent where it's in our pockets, and see what has happened because of that. We have a laptop, we have this, anything that's happening right now, even this podcast right now, is a result of that, right? 100%. Our ability to miniaturize technology. Now, one aspect where we have not achieved that is in energy.
Yes.
We have not been able to become independent. Yes, you will find these isolated huts or villages on mountain tops where they are dependent on solar or wind.
Right.
They're not connected to anything that's happening outside. And trust me, if tomorrow something were to happen, these are the people who will actually survive, not us, right? And this is what we need to try and get.
Yeah.
That's the point that we need to try and get to.
Yeah.
So one thing that our goal at Quintinno Labs, the long-term vision for Quintinno Labs is not to remain limited to an EV charging company.
Mm-hmm.
We want to become an energy company,
right,
and not an energy company that just generates electricity. We have a vision that we want to democratize energy, make it accessible and affordable to all sections, irrespective of how well connected to the grid you are, or get yourself away from the volatility of the grid.
Yeah.
How do we do that? So what we are trying to do now is we are trying to make it so compact that like you are getting energy worth running 7 3 BHK houses into this compact thing that you can fit in the trunk of your car.
Yes.
Right. And that's something which you add solar to it, or perhaps in the future you add nuclear to it, and it will sustain you forever. Right. So that's what we are trying to do.
Right.
And that becomes very, very important. Like I said, when if we are to analyze the entire article by Kastrup, in the debrief, the one that we were just talking about, I think that stands out as the most important part here. Right. The need for miniaturization of technology. So imagine an ecosystem where you have energy which is local, it's independent. You don't have to depend on anyone else. You have your computer, you have your mobile phone, you have the technology. The space, the physical space required for your existence becomes very, very small. Right? Then you start growing your own food, and you become a self-sustaining economy. Right. Perhaps in the space which is as much as this room. Right. You grow your crops here, and then you have energy, you have heating. Even if it gets really, really cold, or if it gets really, really hot because of some thermonuclear war, you will be able to sustain yourself.
Right.
So yes, I think this entire article also builds a case for miniaturization of technology for sure, and energy independence in that sense. If you read *Sapiens* by Harari, so one thing that's mentioned is one leap in our evolution was the development of language. So what tends to happen is the more nuanced your language becomes, the more nuanced your communication becomes, right? So right now the kind of technology that we have, or the kind of even philosophical thought. So one thing that was brought up out there was earlier the only kind of communication that you had was you being able to tell someone, oh, don't go there, it's dangerous. Perhaps you shout or you make some hand gestures that okay, this is dangerous. But as your language evolved, you could tell them a lot more, why is it dangerous?
Yeah.
What animals are there? Yeah. Or, how can you evade the danger?
Yeah.
So the more your language evolves, your communication becomes a lot better.
Yeah.
Right. And that has a direct correlation to your evolution as a species.
Yeah.
That becomes very, very important. I think, recently there was this news where human beings are now trying to figure out how to communicate with whales so that they learn how to communicate with another intelligent species that we might encounter tomorrow.
Yeah.
NHI, literally. So they are now trying to do this with whales. Now whales are still a lot closer to us. Right?
They're also mammals and
I was just thinking about how words. It's such a slow medium, right? For me to communicate an idea to you, I have to first formulate it in the set template that we have for communication, right? And that process of me first of all condensing my idea, which can be so nuanced and so broad, into language which has its own barriers and limitations, and then me telling that to you. So the parsing rate is so slow, one word at a time. I'm telling you, and then you're trying to understand that, and then you're getting back to me. So something that would be very, very crucial for our evolution, apart from all the miniaturization and portability, is how to evolve language. Right? For me to be able to tell everything that I have in my mind to you through some sort of projection, suppose, right? That is such a faster medium of communication. And eventually we will have to reach to that stage, perhaps with something like Neuralink and everything that we are trying to develop with brain-computer interface. It might actually be possible that we are able to project thoughts.
Yes.
Right? And if communication becomes so much faster, then look at the other aspects that results from that. So I think language in that sense becomes so much more important.
And this is also what Kastrup said, right? I mean that what if this, UAPs that we're observing, like, are communicating in that level? And maybe there's a possibility, and maybe there's something that we can learn from them.
Yeah. So he like talks about if two species have evolved separately, right? They have a very different context. So the linguistic context, the very basis of language is different. So it's not as simple as me translating English into Mandarin, suppose. Right? It's a lot more different than that. So now if someone more advanced than us, or someone from a different language than us, what they will have to do is they'll have to give us the thoughts, and our mind will have to formulate it in the way that we understand.
Yeah.
So it becomes a very tricky way for communication. So that's a very important aspect that he touches upon in that particular article.
Yeah. So Divas, what do you, or rather, where do you go for original thought? Like, you are an innovator, you are a researcher, and an entrepreneur. Where do you find original thought? Because what tends to happen is, because of the kind of world that we live in, and I'm a journalist, right? I consume a lot of media. I read a lot of news. I try to catch up with whatever is the biggest event that is happening, and I try to follow that and try to formulate my opinions, right? And in this sort of a worldview that we develop, this frame of reference that we develop,
the lens, the perspective.
Yes. To sort of intellectually and cognitively evolve ourselves and, develop ourselves, we can also tend to lose out on original thought, because we are able to, just borrow opinions, maybe borrow thoughts, and sort of bounce off of ideas, right? And this is something that I also maybe sometimes struggle with, looking for unique angles to, let's say, narrate a journalistic story. And hence I asked, what do you do for original thought?
Yeah, so in Assamese we say adda main, right?
Adda main.
So it's very important that we have conversations. Yeah. Right.
Adda in Hindi also, I guess. Adda, the word exists, which is like it's like a sort of a hangout, right? It's sort of a conversation. Yeah.
So when you're in college, it's quite easy for you to actually have a group of people with whom you can have these conversations, right? That becomes a source of original thoughts, like such random weird conversations we have, and it actually results in broadening the horizons of your thoughts and perspectives. But as you go out of college, right, your circle becomes smaller, and you are forced to go into very homogeneous groups. Perhaps you're working on the same job, right, or perhaps you are from the same locality. So your thoughts become very homogeneous in that sense. So you're not subjected to a diverse range of opinions. That becomes a problem, and I personally have faced that a lot. And what I recently discussed, so one thing that I tried to do, which was an utter failure, was I read something perhaps, or watch a video, and then I'm like, okay, fine, I don't have a group of people to talk to. What do? I just try to become silent and try to think in my head. But it was a very awkward affair, where I'm trying to think, I'm not able to focus, I'm not getting any feedback. It just didn't work out. Yeah,
you're in an empty room, but it's only you, so there's no conversation there.
Exactly. And of course, we are not pro meditators, where you can have conversations with ourselves and stuff like that. So what I started doing is, and that's also some sort of a New Year resolution for me for 2024, where I want to write, right? Not from the perspective of actually publishing something, but to put your thoughts in. So what happens, I realized this, while typing a WhatsApp message, the whole art, like I was saying, of writing something in words is such a slow process. It gives a lot of time to your brain to actually remain focused on that particular topip. You're trying to structure something into sentences, right? And in the process, you start thinking a lot. So what I did, I was like, okay, fine, that seems to be working. So I just went on this thing where I just started writing, right? And I didn't think at all about what I will write next. So as I started writing, and as thoughts kept on coming to my head, and it connected, one to the other. So I just kept on writing. So now if you read the essay, it might be like, you started here and then you ended at a very different place. But the point of the essay is not for other people, right? It's for me to actually put my thoughts in place. So while I'm still not getting any feedback, but your brain in itself has so much information. It's just about collecting it or collating it together in one place. So that's one very important way of doing it. But what is the source of this thought, right? The writing helps me get deeper into a thought, but the source of it can be, so there's some amazing YouTube videos, right? Channels like Melody Sheep, for instance, talks about space and the perspective of, what happens, like how would your voice sound like in different planets, like some very crazy things that you can, like imagine. So you go to these YouTube channels, you read interesting articles like the one we discussed today, or from your perspective, you were a Reuters journalist, so you look at the editorial of different newspapers, and there they go in depth into certain topics, and it's also like, you're looking at the positives, the negatives, you're criticizing, everything is happening. So perhaps that becomes a good starting point, and then if you have people, I would say have conversations with them. If not, start writing. I think that's the best way to go about trying to develop original thought. And also ties to your older question about India as a country trying to innovate, right? If we were to innovate, we need to have a lot more original thought coming from different people. So I think, yes, all of this ties in together to how we see our country growing as well. So original thought in that sense becomes very, very important.
So in terms of arriving at original thought, like an original research, like let's assume there is a problem, right, in India, that and it's not an assumption, but we see that a lot of we are still lacking. If we compare it at a global stage, we are still lacking in terms of innovating new technology or coming up with innovative ideas, like doesn't matter if it's only science or the STEM field, but also in social sciences or any other discipline, right? And one solution can be definitely to improve our campus spaces like universities and educational institutions. We both come from Ashoka University, and a lot of our intellectual and cognitive growth has happened in that space. It has sort of taught us to develop original thought in certain ways. But apart from that, apart from education being a cornerstone of original thought, facilitating original thought, right? What else can we do? Do you think there is a paucity of spaces which can facilitate this? And not only in India, but also specifically in Assam, because I've lived in Bangalore. You are living in Delhi. You are in Guwahati right now, but you're based in Delhi right now. We see that there is still, some level of conversation that is happening. You find a lot of diverse people working in diverse disciplines, working in diverse sectors, who come and exchange ideas. Those ideas lead to some sort of action. Those actions lead to results, and you find new things happening, right? In Guwahati, there I feel a certain level of lack in that. So what do you think can be a solution, like for a tier 2 city like Guwahati?
Yeah, so I think that's a very pertinent question, especially today where we want a lot more innovation to happen. So yes, it's true. Like I was in Bangalore recently for a meeting, at a Third Wave Coffee, right? And the moment you enter, it's such a different vibe. There are like people, youth especially, founders of different companies, people engrossed in projects, having conversations, having debates. That is a sort of culture that we want. So one plan that I have for my dad's retirement now is to have a coffee house in Assam, in in Guwahati specifically. Not from the perspective of a friends and family like hangout place, but rather from that perspective where people are coming here to work for conversations, for meetings, like of that sort, trying to resemble what's happening in the Third Wave Coffees or the Blue Tokais or the Starbucks across the country in these hubs. So yes, there is a lack of space. That's one. University spaces is supposed to be that space where you actually have innovation, you have thought, but somewhere we see that like in the present scenario, that is not being fulfilled to a large extent. Certain from both sides you have censorship of certain thoughts, be it right wing, left wing. Like I'll not get into that in-depth debate, but the point is that from all sections the people are always trying to censor you, right? And I think this like you just mentioned, the name of this podcast is Honibad, and it talks about liberty, right? Like that's the literal translation of that. A space where you're free, where you're not judged, and you can talk, and that becomes very important, and the lack of such spaces is definitely a big problem. So we need to create spaces like that.
Divas, you talked about a lack of spaces to facilitate ideas. I know that your company Quintinno Labs is registered here in Guwahati, your hometown. Both are hometowns, and but you recently moved to Delhi and you're based in Delhi. Why is that? Why did you feel a need to shift from a tier 2 city like Guwahati to a metro city, to the capital of India, to grow your startup? And what are the challenges here?
Yeah, so when you talk about doing a hardware startup, there are 3 essential things that you require. The first being talent, the manpower. The second is the components that you require to build something. And third is your market, right? You can't build in isolation. You need feedback from the market for that.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to software, the game is slightly different because your market is digital. So irrespective of where you are situated, you can find a market from there.
Yeah.
When it comes to talent, again, you can work remotely because there's not something that we're building in a lab together. So you can work in different spaces. Although it's always ideal for you to work together in the same space.
Yeah.
But it's still not a big constraint for you. So that's and you don't have the requirement of components. But for hardware, like the one that we are trying to do in Quintinno, if you are in Guwahati, if you want components, right, it will take you a lot longer. So what will take me, say, 2 weeks here, I can buy it off the shelf in Delhi.
Right.
You have all the vendors situated out there. So my, the cycle, the time for me to actually start building something and like get it out, it becomes a lot shorter there. So it's a lot easier in that sense because you have your vendors, your components situated right where you are. Secondly, the market, right? Is the EV capital. So you have all the Blue Smarts and the Triple E Taxi and all of these.
That's Delhi, yeah.
That's in Delhi. So you have the markets out there. So I have the market out there, I have the components out there, and talent is not a problem.
Yeah.
So if you were to do the same thing out here, what would be required? So for talent, you do have IIT Guwahati, but I think one institution alone is not enough. You require more than that. So that's one thing. We have good educational institutions, but they need to be better at innovating, right? It's not just about getting people out who you train to do something. You need innovators like coming out. You need that ecosystem out here. Secondly, you need that components market. I think now with the semiconductor plant coming up in Assam, that will be a big boost for us. But there's a lot more than just that, right? So you need to build that infrastructure out here where you get all of the components, or maybe at least build a chain where you can get it instantly, even if all of it is not here. Right. And what was the third thing? The market. And that's something that will evolve naturally. I mean, you don't have an EV market out here, but you definitely have a market for many other things that can be built here and sold here. So that is something that needs to happen. And so one thought that I have, so that's like a vision that I have for the long term, where you must have heard of the NEOM project based out of
Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, the line, as they call it. So it's essentially a line, and across the desert. It's a futuristic city.
It's a
futuristic net zero sustainable city is what they call it. And it's crazy, the level of innovation that would be required. Now it's a whole different story how feasible it is and whether they'll be able to achieve it or not. But they have a vision and they have started working on it. It's not just on paper. They actually have started working on it. They have already completed a section of it. I think the Winter Olympics would be held there next. So
oh wow.
And Winter Olympics
in the middle of a desert.
Yes. So artificial snow and stuff like that. So they are giving wings to their dreams as well. So this vision that I have of creating a similar space, not to that level, which makes it very impractical and less feasible, but something that is feasible from Assam's perspective, some sort of an innovation village, some sort of an innovation township, where you provide incentives to different startups to come and work together, a sustainable city that can become a model for how Guwahati can expand or other cities can expand, because cities are expanding and they will have to expand. New cities will have to come up. If this can become a model for how they should expand or grow, that is the goal here. And the idea is that it should be absolutely sustainable. Right now, if you talk about software, if anyone is starting up with software, many of them decide Bangalore or Hyderabad as their, a location.
Yeah.
But when it comes to hardware, especially sustainability related hardwares, like hardware startups, you don't have one common space. Someone is building from Jammu, someone is building from, Hyderabad, someone from Assam, somewhere else. So if we can create an incentive structure where all of them come together, and Assam is perhaps ideally suited for something in sustainability, eco-techno-tourism of that sort. So if we can incentivize them to come together into this one space, like I was like telling you how Telangana has created this space called T-Hub.
Yeah.
So whenever you're building something like this, it's called rapid prototyping. You have an idea and then you are rapidly creating a physical prototype of that. Yeah. That requires a lot of machinery. Apart from just the different components, it requires a lot of machining, like CNC machining, 3D printing, CNC bending. There are a lot of other workshop type-ish stuff that you require. So they have built T-Hub where you have all of this, right? So if this space that we are talking about, if it has a facility like that where for me to build a rapidly build a prototype of something, I have everything in-house. I don't have to go out, right? And the government becomes the first buyer. Assume something like this is someone is trying to build building material out of plastic, right? They're building in some off-ish location where they don't even have a market right now. Right. But if we can create this space where they come here, they build this, and say PWD, the Public Works Department, becomes the first buyer, and they integrate that, because for any startup, finding your first customer becomes the biggest hurdle. Right. If you have your first customer, if you have some traction, if you have revenue, you can raise money. Right. Without that, it's very, very difficult. So the idea in my head is that we create this model city or a model township close to the Brahmaputra. Reason being, I want river innovation to be another important part. In Assam, you see how every year we have the floods, and we have not yet created a mechanism where we live with it. What happens is, the floods come, the embankments break, there's flooding, people run, their homes are destroyed, and then they come back again. After that, they get some compensation. It's not a sustainable way at all, right? We need to learn how to live with the river and the flooding, something that other countries have done. Say if you go to Europe, you go to places like Netherlands and some other places out there, they have built technology where even if it's flooding, they are making good use of it. So we can look at a city like this situated next to a township like that situated next to the Brahmaputra river, where you are innovating on the river as well, and then you have the space. So that's the vision that I have, and that also becomes a space where you are innovating, you have these conversations, the space that we were talking about for original ideas to evolve, where you bring such people together, such things are bound to happen. So that's a vision that I have. It's a massive infrastructure project perhaps, but something that is much required, especially if Guwahati wants to position itself as the gateway to Southeast Asia. Yeah.
So you're not talking about like a space where just people come and live, but you also talk where, there are just corporate parks and offices, but you're talking about a vibrant, like a township, like maybe something on the lines of Gift City that Gujarat is building, but a different version of that, like more manufactured hardware focused version of that, which has like a lot of technological innovation happening and catering to Assam's needs first and foremost, and then to the demands that are out there in the market, like beyond Assam probably. And I'm assuming, like, if you're talking about this space and a lot of companies and startups and innovators are interested, there might be a possibility that these companies are also buying off of each other, right? So it's a very self-sustaining model that
ecosystem.
An ecosystem that can develop. I guess like something that I'm interested to know is that what you think would require, like who will this be like a privately done thing? Can this be a privately done thing? Because if the government takes it, we know that the Assam government is in a lot of debt, like that way. But then again, there are many such models that are there in different parts of the country. So is Assam ready for something like that, ecologically or like even financially, speaking?
So, for anything like this to happen, you definitely need help of the government. There's no doubt about that. Just getting the land in the right space is something that the government will have to help you out with. Even some sort of financing perhaps, and also the end buyer, right? I talked about how the PWD can become the first buyer. So you need strong government involvement, but you can't expect the government to run this. You definitely need the lead in this thing to be coming from the private sector. And this is where the challenge comes, that how do you get people to invest in a project like this? You have to create a business model that is also helping all of these investors get return for their money. And this is where I require help with, trying to figure out how can a project like this become self-sustaining, in the sense that if someone is investing, they're also getting returns. And the government gives you the initial push, but you are not dependent on them for getting you across the line, right? So, there are different ways in which that can happen. So the startups that are coming here, you can take a small percentage of their company as, like there's a standard practice followed by incubators. So that is something that can happen. So that essentially means that the startups that are a part of this particular space, their success is your success, right? That's one thing. Secondly, if it grows and then real estate becomes a thing, right? That's another possibility where, you are using the solutions or the products developed by these startups to build houses, right, or infrastructure out there, and then people are coming and living here. So you talked about the gift city in Gujarat, and I look at it more as a mix of gift city and something like Auroville, right, where it's an entire alternate ecosystem where you can also experiment, because these are the people who will be the early adopters, right? And if you have a space which has early adopters, a higher concentration of early adopters, you can try out a lot of things. Alternate economies, right? How do you alternate education systems? So it's not just limited to sustainability and hardware technology. It goes much beyond that. How do we live as a society? What should be the ideal model for society to progress beyond the present stage? So that's how I'm looking at it. But yes, it has to be supported by the government, but eventually it has to be a private endeavor for sure.
You mentioned about how software is already a thing that happens at this point maybe almost exclusively in Hyderabad and Bangalore in the country, right? They have the companies that have begun there, and companies also who are seeking to invest in India sort of are almost entirely based in these two cities, right? And maybe a little bit of in Gurgaon, Noida, maybe but Bangalore and Hyderabad are pretty much the big hubs. But what I'm seeing is an opportunity in the manufacturing sector, right? Because that is something that, economists and experts often point out that India might have missed the manufacturing bus, maybe. And that is where manufacturing is where China actually saw its growth. And all developed economies, they move on from, the agricultural industry to a manufacturing, phase, and then they move on to services.
Right.
And when they move on to services, they outsource from manufacturing. And right now there is a big need, globally.
In India, we had a leapfrogging,
We leapfrogged from the agriculture to direct to the services, and we sort of missed manufacturing that way. And that's an advantage in itself, because if we have services, then we can, leverage it for more research and development. But then, which is already happening in the big cities, metro cities. But then for tier 2 cities in India, there is an opportunity to leverage manufacturing. We are seeing, you mentioned the Tata, semiconductor plant that is going to be set up. It's a very big plant. A lot of investment going down there.
40,000 crores.
Yeah, that's a massive amount. And in Guwahati, especially, and in Assam in general, I think there is something to be said about leveraging manufacture, because we have a lot of labor that is available, young, people who would like that sort of employment. And if that private investment can be sought out for, it would sort of, help us boost our economy. And at the same time, also in terms of technological innovation, it would allow for, ideas like yours and probably more such ideas to sort of grow in this sort of scenario. And this is obviously the idea that you talked about of sort of a township is a pretty futuristic and cool sort of notion. But even beyond that, I feel there is a big opportunity to capture when it comes to manufacturing. And then there is another thing, our proximity to Southeast Asia.
Exactly.
And sort of a little bit to China, maybe
opens up a lot of markets.
And iPhone, if you look at manufacturing iPhones, it's the classic example. Or any other hardware,
Tesla coming into India very soon. So
that one another example. But people are looking for alternatives to China in terms of manufacturing, and India is definitely up there in trying to capture that. Government is sort of subsidizing massively when it comes to semiconductor manufacturing. And then we are looking at another country, which is Vietnam, which is pretty close to Guwahati, like
true.
Yeah, than the rest of the country.
I think it's just a 2-hour flight from here, perhaps.
Yeah, probably like less than Bangalore, probably. Yeah,
of course, easily.
Yeah. So there is so much potential in our state.
Yeah, so that's true. So first of all, when it comes to manufacturing, the good part of that is that the employment opportunities are manifold, right? Because when you are building a product, which is not software, it's hardware. There's so many different elements to it,
right?
And every element in itself can be a different industry, employing thousands of people.
Yeah.
So that is one. But at one point that I would like to mention is, one sort of idea or notion that people have is we see something succeeding somewhere else, and then we want to copy that and like bring it here.
Yeah.
And we have to be very wary about that. Reason being, every place has its own sort of characteristics that, or and those can become its USP. In Assam, if you talk about it, of course, no doubt about it that it can become a manufacturing hub given our proximity to Southeast Asia, China. Another very important aspect is agriculture, right? So going ahead with the population increase, I mean, of course, there's this whole debate whether we need more population or we already have too much population, globally. In India, we definitely have a lot of population. So to feed this population, you require agricultural land, right? But is it true that you actually require more agricultural land? Countries like Israel have shown us that not necessarily, right? What Israel has done, it's 65% desert. And despite that, they have, developed technology where they are doing Singapore as well, I guess, where you have vertical farming.
Yeah.
So given that Assam's strength lies to some extent in agriculture, why not bring in startups or innovation in that field as well, where we are figuring out alternate methods of agriculture, where we can make our land a lot more productive, right? Green revolution is great, but it has its downsides. You require a lot more pesticides, a lot more water, a lot more insecticides. And
we have seen the downsides of here.
Exactly. So alternative to that, we require other innovative methods for a space like this where, okay, tomorrow when we require more food production, how can we increase production? Right. So when we talk about a township like this, first of all, it has to be designed according to the strengths of that particular location. That's very, very important. And I think agriculture and water will play a very important part if we have a space like this out here, right? And secondly, coming to manufacturing, yes, it's very true that, given out, and this needs to be leveraged. And I think this government has put that in our minds where, yes, this is a possibility. I think 2-3 years back, we were not even thinking about it that, okay, we are close to Southeast Asia, perhaps something, there's potential here. But just thinking about something and then now actually executing it is very, very different. So now what we are talking about right now, this idea has to go out to the investors who then need to come and put in money out here. So that will be the challenge here. How can we get this point across? How can we build the infrastructure, perhaps roadways, railways that connect us directly to Myanmar, Vietnam, and to Southeast Asia that way? That infrastructure project cannot be done by private entities. It has to be done by the government. So they have to take the lead, and other people will follow if you can open up the opportunities here. Yes, definitely.
But we also see there's a lot of many challenges, in fact, when it comes to doing business in Assam or in Guwahati. You have already talked about the lack of skilled people here, and there is a lack of markets in general. The market in Assam for, let's say, a range of products is very limited at this point. I was looking up statistics for new businesses in Assam or registered startups in Assam, and it's less than 500 at this point, whereas in the entire country there are more than 1 lakh startups in the entire country. Not even 1% of the total startup ecosystem of the country, right? If I have to put my finger on the challenges that we have in developing businesses in Assam, I could think of how our economy is struggling. The government is in immense debt because of the number of, probably there are a lot of schemes that they are investing in. Our population, there is a significant percentage of our population still under poverty. There is massive unemployment, and due to which there is a lack of skilled labor. Lack of skilled labor, and thus unemployment. maybe our educational institutions are not up to the mark, not world class yet, or not even up to the level of India's average. Maybe we are below that still. So there are a lot of challenges to overcome before we look at Assam as a hub for business or innovation or manufacturing. So how do we overcome these challenges? You as a startup owner, how do you think these can be overcome, and what does the government need to do to facilitate this? Or is there a more cultural sort of change that needs to happen in society in how we look at this issue?
If you look at Assam's history, we have had a very rough history till very recently, right?
And by rough, you mean like the insurgencies?
Exactly.
Yeah. And there is an aversion from the private players to sort of come in or express any interest.
Anytime there's no stability in a region, people will not invest, right? It's only very recently that we have had that level of stability come in.
Yeah.
So I think this is the time where we now put our foot on the accelerator, right? We have solved that problem by and large, almost completely, where we don't have insurgency and there's political stability now to a large extent. Okay. And now that we have that, the first bottleneck has been solved. The second bottleneck is we don't have a big enough market, right? And this is something when the semiconductor plant thing happened here, the investment happened, I was going through the comments and people are like, isn't it a waste of money that they're investing in Assam because there's not even enough market out there? So like I said, the first thing is we have to show to the world that no, there is a market, not specifically in the Northeast, but in Southeast Asia. So it's actually a huge market.
Yeah.
So that is the second thing that we need to show.
Yeah.
And thirdly, the infrastructure inside the state, right? We have artificial floods in Guwahati, right? Who in their right mind would want to work in a place where tomorrow you're going to office and then you're stuck for 3-4 hours in the floods?
Yeah.
So that infrastructure problem has to be solved. And now with all the flyovers coming in, in the right places, I think that infrastructure problem is we are starting to tackle that. But we still have some way to go, right? Weather does remain a concern, but it's still comparatively a lot better than, certain parts in North India, perhaps. So that's something that is still in our favor, I would say. But that infrastructure problem is something which is there, right? That is something that we have to solve. And, when you talk about asking, say, Microsoft to come here and build an office, it's not just about convincing them, right? Because they will then have to convince their employees to come and stay here.
Right.
When you're staying here, what do you require? You require good educational facility for the children of the employees. Yeah. You require healthcare for the employees, right? Apart from that, when the youth is coming in, you require clubs, you require pubs, you require that youth sort of youth-oriented infrastructure. Culturally, we have to change. Tomorrow if there's a bar opening up somewhere in the middle of the city, you'll have everyone complaining that, this is not our culture. While it's true that we have to, work on ensuring that the local population is not disturbed, but as a society, I think we have to be more open to that change, right? If we want other people to feel comfortable coming and working here.
Yeah.
And that's a big problem. You solve everything and then you don't have that, that lifestyle sort of infrastructure in-house. It will be a problem, irrespective of having a good market, having good, talent, having good infrastructure. If you don't have, the reason why Bangalore, despite all the traffic, is not able to declutter is because the youth do not want to go to the, semi-urban areas of Bangalore because they have all of the clubs, pubs, bars in that place, right? Yeah. And that is going to be a problem here. We need to build that. So this is not something that can be solved instantly, but I think, there has to be some sort of concerted effort by the government to ensure that we have spaces like that. Even if it's 2 streets, perhaps, not more than that. Something like Church Street that you have in Bangalore. If we can have some... And this is not something that the government alone can do, but there has to be a concerted effort in that direction. Otherwise, you can't convince a lot of people to come here. Yeah. That will be a problem. We have natural beauty. Yeah. People love that. But apart from that, we also need that urban development, right? Yeah. So I think, yes. So when to sum it up, that I first talked about the fact that we have come out of insurgency. That's great. We need the infrastructure inside. We need to show that there is a market. And then we need to build the other infrastructure that can then incentivize employees to come and work here. So I think these things working together can really help Assam or like Guwahati in that sense grow. When you ask specifically about startups, another thing that is a problem for most people is when you're starting out, it's a challenge. You're not earning from day one.
Yeah.
So what people have to do is they have to find out sources of income. So mostly you'll find someone working an odd job, and then they get very little time to actually work on the startup because they have to sustain themselves. I was looking at the startup policies of different states, and say states like Gujarat, they will give you about 10,000 rupees per month so that you sustain yourself.
Yeah.
It's not a huge amount. I think the government, I'm not an economist in that sense, so they will be able to find their calculations there. But if something like that can happen where the government is paying you to sustain you, and obviously it has to be done in a very careful manner, it's not something that should act like the freebies here. If that is happening, that you're getting 10k per month irrespective of whether you're working on this or not, irrespective of whether you're earning or not. So I think that is another incentive that can really help people to start up in a place like Assam. So I think all of these, if put in the right place, we can definitely do a lot.
Get what you were saying about a sort of a repulsion to outsiders coming in Assam, and that has been a problem in various levels in Assam. If we go into that, there'll be a whole other podcast episode. But what I've noticed and observed during my time when I was living in Bangalore was that what used to happen is that across all the companies that I've seen or I've interacted with, or in my own profession where I was working at Reuters, and across all multinational companies, what I've seen is the greatest benefactor, beyond obviously from these companies and corporations who are doing business and gaining a lot, has been the local population who has benefited from the employment opportunities that it generates, this sort of investment from outside generates. And what has sort of subsequently happened is that this has also created an environment for local innovators to emerge and local startups to emerge, for which the local population I see as the greatest benefactor of opening up your city or your state to such changes happening. To that extent, culturally, yes, we need to maybe make our peace with urbanization, if that's one way to put it. But at the same time, I also wanted to ask you about sustainability, right? You were talking about having a sustainable approach, but because we cannot copy the same examples, right? There are lessons to be learned from a Delhi NCR or a Gurgaon, and there are lessons to be learned from a Bangalore, and we already have our inherent problems, right? In terms of public infrastructure and flooding and all that. And so we need to take a different approach, and we need to take probably a more sustainable or a more holistic approach in urbanizing, so to say.
So as they say in the startup world, that is not always the best thing to be the first mover, because then there's so many other problems that you don't even know that will come up. One advantage that we have is that we have models that we can follow, and we know what the problems are in those models. And like you said, we have to play to the advantages of Assam specifically. And now anything that you do in today's day and age, and if whether you're starting up or it comes to the larger economy in general, sustainability becomes a very, very important point. So one thing that I'm trying to do, and we had a conversation with the government regarding this. It's on hold right now, due to various reasons, but that's something that would be lovely. So there's the startup called Mini Renewables. And what they are doing is they are building turbines, small compact turbines that can be placed in flowing water, and it can generate electricity. And in a place like Assam, where perhaps we have every village has a river next to it. That's the same. With the Brahmaputra and its entire basin, the tributaries. Almost every village has a river or a stream next to it. Now, the technology that they have, these turbines that they have, it can generate enough power that can easily sustain a village. And once again, it comes back to the idea of energy democratization and energy independence, where every village has its own mini grid. So things like that have to be played to our advantage. We have to get these technologies. Also, another sad part is that a lot of this technology exists. It's just that the government is so caught up in other bigger issues, perhaps, that things. So maybe the government can create some sort of a wing that is specifically focused on getting, these kind of things here. Right. Yeah, I mean, if say, for example, we can use that technology, generate electricity from flowing water, there's nothing like it, right? And similarly, so we don't have a lot of opportunity for solar out here, given the sort of climate that we have. It's overcast, it's like you have monsoons, and it's quite heavy monsoons out here, so you have like rains for a long period. But we have alternatives in generating electricity from water. So green energy in that sense can become something that becomes our core focus, and that's how we distinguish ourselves from the other urban metropolitans like Bangalore, Hyderabad, where these are like urban concrete jungles, right? It's hot, it's like traffic, there's dust. We can become a lot more sustainable, play to our advantages, and know what our strengths are, and proceed accordingly.
So the alternative is to using our environment, which and preservation of our environment to our advantage while urbanizing, and that can itself be an attraction for people who would want to invest here, right? You talked about turbines, you talked about producing energy. And this is probably we're approaching towards the end of our conversation here, but I wanted to ask you about alternative sources of energy. Like we have already talked about the UAPs phenomenon and all that, but a specific technology I wanted to talk to you about was nuclear and nuclear fission. If I'm not wrong, and a technology which it is under research, and it is often proposed or argued that can be the final solution to the problem of carbon emission, because it will be the ultimate green energy source, something that can also be probably miniaturized eventually to to achieve the objective of energy independence at a probably like a family level, at an individual level. So do you have your views on if nuclear energy is something that is achievable? How much progress has it made? And if it's something that can happen in India or Assam in the foreseeable future, or even in our lifetimes?
So first of all, I truly believe that nuclear is the future of energy. There are limitations, and then there are benefits of it. So one societal bottleneck is most people think it's not safe, right? There's this societal perception that like if you have a nuclear power plant in your city, any day it blows up, and then like you're messed up.
Because that's the image like people have had, because the only association we have had with nuclear energy is
or Fukushima,
or Hiroshima and Nagasaki, all that.
So it's really, really safe, right? All research point towards just one fact, that is absolutely safe. The last big problem that we had was perhaps Fukushima Daiichi, when the tsunami happened in Japan.
2013 or
2011.
2011, sorry.
So it's been, I think, 13 years since then. So if you look at it, like if you try and understand what has happened in the past 10, 11 years or 12 years, it's not that the safety mechanisms have improved. We are already at the peak. It's very safe. What has happened in the human level, so that you can minimize human errors, right? Standardizing the process of how you keep it safe, ensuring that people are actually doing what they're supposed to do. So almost all errors are very human made errors. So technology wise, it's a very, very safe technology, and I'm talking about fission here. The problem with fission is, so what happens in fission is that you have one heavy nucleus which you're breaking into
two smaller ones.
Yes, and in the process you generate a lot of electricity,
opposed
a lot of energy.
Opposed to fusion, where there is two smaller lighter atoms which you converge into one. You fuse into one, and that emits energy. So from the little that I know, so when you're doing fission, is actually the electromagnetic energy that you are releasing, energy from electromagnetic forces. But when it comes to fusion, you can use the strong forces, right? So what happens with fusion is that you generate a lot more energy, and the best part about fusion is that there's no foreseeable radioactive byproduct. So that's one major problem with fission, that you have to also ensure that the byproduct, which is radioactive in nature, has to be stored and kept safe. Right? Now, when it comes to fusion, I think the future is fusion. And recently in 2022 December, we made a breakthrough where for the first time in the history of mankind, we actually generated
So what happens in fusion is that you have to also give in a lot of energy to actually make fusion happen. So while on one hand you're giving a lot of energy, so far we had not been able to actually get more energy out of it in the process. But in 2022 December, we did it for the first time where, it's called ignition. But the amount of energy that you put in was less than the amount of energy that you got out of it. So this was based out of California, I think the National Ignition Facility, NIF. So it's believed that by 2050, we will actually have energy from nuclear fusion in our grid. Right. Wow. So that is the future. Nuclear fusion is the future because it's like you don't even have byproducts, and we have enough, uranium deposits, etc., to sustain us. It is definitely the future. But I'll tell you where the problem is. The problem is to do with the cost and the time. Right now, to meet our sustainability goals, the goal is that by 2030 we need to reduce our greenhouse emissions by 45%, so that we don't increase temperature by 1.5 degrees. Right. The problem is that to actually build a nuclear fission facility, we're not talking about fusion anymore. That's like at the cutting edge. We have not yet made it there. But when it comes to fission, to actually set up a nuclear fission plant, it takes many years to even get it to to build it, right? And it's very, very costly. It's a lot easier, a lot quicker, a lot cheaper to have solar plants or wind farms.
Right.
So yes, from a long-term perspective, it's definitely nuclear. But in the short term, if we want to meet our sustainability goals, by 2050 we want to achieve net zero, right? But if it takes 10 years to build a nuclear fission plant and then actually get it to give you energy, it might be a little too late for us to meet our goals, and we might be at that we might have crossed the tipping point by then. So that is a very tricky situation where we know that this is the future solution, but at the same time I don't exactly know what are the bottlenecks, why we take so many years to actually build it. Perhaps if there's some innovation around that, and if we can get it running much quicker than that, then it solves all of our problems. I think countries like France, I think it's more than 50% nuclear, and they're doing phenomenally well. It's not that it's a problem. Good thing about nuclear again is with solar and wind, you are at the mercy of nature. Someday there's no sun, then you don't produce enough electricity. There's no wind, you don't produce enough electricity. Nuclear 24/7, 365 days, it's a reliable source of renewable energy.
And from what I understand, the storage of radiation waste that is going to be produced because of fission, that can also be utilized for future energy purposes, if I'm not wrong. And there's technology around that. There is also being research that is undergoing.
So I'm not well aware of how exactly it works, but I'm sure that if it's still radioactive and it still has a lot more to offer. Similarly with battery, right now one major concern is, we are using electric vehicles. What do we do with the battery when they reach their end of life? So battery recycling will become a big thing, right? So there are again, these things you can again create an alternate second life for be it nuclear, be it batteries. That's how it works.
Has there been any research in India as far as nuclear energy is concerned, and how long you think it's going to take us to probably see it coming into day of life?
I mean India already has, I think, about 9, 11, 12 sort of nuclear fission plants. We already have it. It's just about scaling it up. So that again depends on whether it makes economic sense. So India is actually doing phenomenally well when it comes to transition to clean energy, but primarily through solar and wind. So we are definitely trying to meet our goals. In fact, India will meet its goals much before what was originally planned. So we are doing phenomenally well. So we are doing really well in terms of setting up solar farms and wind farms. When it comes to nuclear, the constraints, like I told you, is cost and time. If that can be solved, then I don't see a bottleneck as to why we can't scale nuclear power as well. So that there are these are the only challenges. It's not that there is no intent. I think India is doing quite well in terms of transitioning to clean energy.
I think we can arrive at the end of this conversation. Divas, it was lovely talking to you, and we talked about your startup. We went to uncharted territories regarding UAPs.
Very literally.
And then we came home and we talked about our city.
Assam and Guwahati.
Right. But thanks for this conversation. I hope your startup succeeds. Flourishes. And you're able to achieve your goals pretty soon. And thank you for being part of this podcast.
Thank you so much, Biplob, for inviting me. And I think it's been a pleasure talking to an ex-Reuters journalist and getting the sort of questions that you asked. It's very important that, we bring out where the future of Assam is, where the future of, clean energy is and clean mobility is. And I think we did a good job at it. And also the UAP phenomenon, I'm in love with it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm very happy with the conversation that we have had, and I look forward to having more such conversations with, very random and uncharted topics going ahead. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Hope to see you again here, Divas. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.